Take your seat, please. All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Sellich, president of Speak Up Newport, and I want to welcome you to our March program. Speak Up Newport's the community forum for discussion of civic issues. We put on 10 programs a year. We sponsor the annual Mayor's Dinner, and we give out scholarships to our seniors at Corona Del Mar and Newport Harbor High School. This last year, we were able to give out 4 $3,000 scholarships, so we're pretty proud of that. We have some VIPs here this evening. First of all, we have former Mayor Evelyn Hart. Evelyn, somewhere. Maybe she's still outside. Former Mayor Diane Dixon. Diane. Former Mayor Steve Rosansky. It's former Mayor's night. And last but not least on the former Mayor's list, Duffy, former Mayor Duffy. And also we've got our 2 harbor masters here, Lieutenant Korn, maybe, oh, there he is in the back there, and Kurt Borsting, the city's harbor master. Kurt, great. I want to thank the bungalow for all the good food out there. I hope you had a happy St. Patty's Day with the corned beef and cabbage. And you know, they do a great job for us, so we really appreciate it. So if you have a chance, get out there and support the bungalow restaurant. Also, on the seats, you'll notice we have these comment cards, so we kind of like to know how you heard about our program. We like to track it so we know how to get the word out on what we're doing. And then also, if you have any suggestions for future programs, you can put those on the cards. And if you notice, we went to the larger size cards for those of you that are visually handicapped. All right, so this month's program is on the future of dredging in Newport Harbor. We're preparing to embark on a major dredging program, which is a follow-up to the dredging program that was done a few years ago in the harbor. That program was a major milestone, but it didn't achieve the city's goal of dredging the harbor to its 1930s design depth. And tonight we have to tell us what's going on this program, our Public Works Director, Dave Webb, and the Harbor Resources Manager, Chris Miller. Now, Dave currently serves as our Director of Public Works. He oversees the city's $74 million capital improvements program, civil and transportation engineering, public right-of-way development, and permitting. He also deals with traffic and signal installation operations, water quality, municipal maintenance operations, and a whole slew of other things. So he has quite a broad range of responsibility. And prior to coming to Newport, Dave used to work for the city of Huntington Beach. And then Chris has worked for the city for 18 years, and those of you that have been around for a while might remember that he was responsible for overseeing the prior dredging project, and he did a terrific job of coordinating that. It was pretty complicated with moving all the boats and the docks and floats around, and he did a really good job on that. So when we get to questions and answers, there'll be another gentleman. Hugh, raise your hand. Hugh's going to be on that side of the room. I'll be on this side of the room. And Dave or Chris will call on you. And don't ask your question until you get a microphone, because our program's being recorded for future broadcast on NBTV. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave and Chris and on the future of dredging in Newport Harbor.
Do you need me to speak in a mic, or can I talk? All right. Good evening now. My name is Dave Webb, Director of Public Works. Thank you, Ed, for that wonderful introduction. And I will use a mic. I'm pretty loud with my staff, but they want to record this, so I'll be using the mic tonight. Thanks for coming out tonight, and I hope you took care of yourself in front, take care of the nice hospitalities, and we appreciate all that's done here. This is a great group. And we want to be thankful again that you're coming down tonight to talk about an important project that we've been working on for some time, and something that's really key to the city. It's the dredging of our harbor, trying to keep it healthy. So we're going to spend some time tonight on some background on that. I'm going to stay pretty high level, some of the questions. There's a lot of details, a lot of science. There's also a lot of stuff in here, and I'm happy to answer any of that if you want to go off on some revenue. If you want to hear about how our trips to Washington are, who we met, I can maybe talk to you about that too. But let's start with the generals. So we're going to talk tonight about the lower harbor dredging and get right into that. If my clicker works. All right. I guess I'm not doing that. So let me go the old-fashioned way. I'll just click the slides. Maybe I won't do that either. And we're not moving here, I'm sorry. Just give me just a second. There it is. Well, I think it moved, but it's slow. All right, my screen's different from that, so now we're interesting.
Page down.
Well, give us just, I'm sorry, so just a second, because a lot of data, I need my slides on this. A lot of you like to hear me talk. I like to hear me talk, but maybe tonight I'll stick with the script.
I don't know, Dave. Page down. Maybe it's this.
You want to reboot it and pull it off? And
Yeah.
let's see if you can go there. See if you can find that. And you're here.
Wait.
Oh, we got some slides. Maybe Chris can keep it rolling for me. You want to run the slides for me?
Yep, I'll do it.
All right, let's see if we can get through this and not have technical difficulties. Or I'll have to bore you with storm drains and traffic and a lot of other topics I get to deal with. So real quick on the harbor, we've been doing a lot of outreach on this. It's a large project. We've been working on this for many, many years. Happy to say we're getting closer and closer. Some of the groups we've been talking to, including yourselves tonight, we really want to get the public involved. We want to make sure people understand. A lot of people have a lot of interest in the harbor. You get the next slide, Chris. The goals of dredging the harbor, I put them up here. The big goals that we're really looking at is, as Ed introduces, the harbor hasn't been dredged since 1930, roughly, the whole harbor. About 1930 was its original dredging, and a lot of it was built, if you're familiar with the harbor, a lot of the islands like Balboa Island was partly built by the dredging, Lido Island was filled up by the dredging, a lot of the materials went out towards the Balboa Beach and created a lot of the peninsula. We then tried another dredge in 2020, and we were able to get about 6,000 cubic yards out of the harbor. We still have a lot of material on the bottom. Where did this material come from? We have a big big creek that comes in the back, San Diego Creek, and a lot of the material washed down before Orange County was developed when there's orange groves and things like that. We had those big storms in the 60s and 70s. We had a lot of material moved down there. People used to tell me how filled up the upper bay was, and we did a big dredging project there. A lot of that material moved down in the lower bay and still sitting there today. So we have about 1.2 million cubic yards that we still need to remove to get it down to its design depth. You can go to the next slide there, Chris. It's working? Great. Back to technology. Why are we focusing so much on the harbor? Well, on your slide, I put a bunch of bullet points on there. It's a regionally significant public recreation facility in Southern California. You're all well aware of all the boating and the sailing and the fishing and all the great things that take place in the harbor. The harbor is a huge economic engine, not just for the city, but for the region. I'll talk about that in a little bit, too. It also, by the way, is the foundation of all your property values. If you live on the harbor, around it, a lot of that property value has to do with a healthy, working harbor. So that's an important point. This harbor is housing still some shipyards and marine facilities are very important to the nature of the harbor. And they're the only ones left between San Diego and Long Beach that can handle larger vessels and commercial vessels. That's very important too. We need to keep those healthy. We have a major commercial ferry in our port. It goes to Catalina. Everybody's familiar with the flyer. A lot of cargo and transportation and passengers goes out of there. And then, of course, we have the home of the Coast Guard cutter that's here. It's funny, I was just thinking today, I used to remember as a kid, I used to see the Coast Guard cutter go up to Lido and back, and I've never seen that in the years that I've been here. I don't know if they don't do that because of security purposes or they're worried about grounding or what, but that's an important element. We have the Orange County Sheriff Office in our harbor, a significant element. And also, a lot of people don't realize we're a port of refuge for ocean-going mariners. If there's a big storm and you're caught, any size ship, big ships, can come in this harbor and get out of the winds, the waves, or if they're taking on water or something. This is a port of refuge, and we need to make sure that's always maintained. I mentioned the economics of the harbor. In 2018, we did an economic analysis of the harbor. We're just curious, as we're talking to the feds, what kind of revenue we get out of this. The harbor, we found out in 2018, generates $1 billion annually of commercial economic value to the city and the region. It also generates 8,300 plus jobs in the area, and it generates about $366 million in labor revenue. And more importantly, we point this out to the feds in the state, $161 million in federal and state taxes. And the big one we use on the feds is down at the bottom there, you see my table. It's about $86 million a year we generate in federal taxes that go back to Washington. And we're like, hey, we need a little piece of that back every once in a while. And that's one of the key elements that we pointed out to them. And that's one of the reasons why we did the study. But it was really a finding. And the study's boundary was this. So look at that boundary, and that's what they took into consideration. But you can imagine going further out, there's more value there too. So that's an important point. We need to make sure the harbor functions well for that. So what is the current status of our project? We've been, like I said, moving along for some time. We have done a sediment characteristics study. I'll tell you a little bit about that. We've done the economic analysis that I've told you about. We've actually previewed the sediments and disposal options. We've actually accommodated, and the council has put $4.6 million aside for the city's portion of what we're trying to do in the harbor. And then we're working on other elements. Right now we're currently working on the environmental document for the project. We're in the process of designing the actual dredging and the CAD design, which I'll talk about a little later. Working on our regulatory permits, and also a key factor is appropriation of federal funds. Little known fact of our harbor. Our harbor is one of the only harbors around that was actually set up by the War Department and the Congress back in 1918, I think it was, by a map. We were established back then by the federal government. A lot of harbors aren't that way, and that brings in the federal arm to our harbor, and that's why we're working with the federal government, because today they are still responsible for the dredging of our harbor. Not that they have any money, they tell us a lot, but they're still technically responsible for 100% of the dredging. That's an important point. They know that, but again, it gets into priorities, so we do a lot of advocation. I know I've dragged my council members to Washington several times. We've made a lot of progress there, but educating the federal government, they're looking all over the place, and of course, they can't seem to find their way out of certain boxes right now, as you know, but we want to make sure they know where Newport Harbor is, what we're doing, and how they need to bring some revenue sources here to keep that healthy economic engine running for this, not just the city, but the local economy. So from there, to get this project ready, we started to go out and we sampled the harbor. That's one of the things before we dredge. The federal government requires this. We had to go out and do sampling all throughout the harbor. And this is just a sample of the sampling. And every one of those dots is where we went down, we shoved a sampling tube down through the sediment, pulled up that sample, and that sample of the sediment is now sent to a lab. And they look at that sediment, they test it for what's in it. Is there sand? Is it silt? Is there constituents in it? Could be some contaminants, could be other things. And that tells us what we can do with that sediment. And that's an important thing, so that analysis gets done. So we did all that, and then we started figuring out what kind of sediments do we have on the bottom. So on our sediment characteristics, what we found is on the bottom we have about 1 million plus yards that are good that we can take out to what they call ocean open disposal. We can take it out of the harbor when we dredge the material, and we can place it out in the ocean. And some of it can be on the near shore. If it's very sandy and we like that, we're going to put it towards the surf zone. That's a great thing, because the more sand we can get towards our ocean beaches, the more buttress the peninsula is, the better it is for overtopping and global rise of the seawater. If we can get those waves to break a little further out, there's less damage to the home should we have a big storm, so that's important. About 1 million yards has to go out to what we call LA3. That's a disposal site 6 miles off the coast. And then there was another amount of sediment that had some constituents in it, about 100,000 yards of it. In that 100,000 yards, the sample showed some trace elements of DDT, PCBs, and mercury. Those are the constituents that we're kind of working through on our sediment analysis. So there's rules about that, and that material can't be disposed in the ocean, and I'll get into that in a little bit too. So those bottom materials, there's an EPA limit for LA3, and I'll show you a picture of that just in a minute, of 1.0 parts per million for mercury. That's a very low level. You think 1 part per million. I always give that example of, you probably got this room full of ping pong balls that are white, and there's one of them that's orange. I mean, it's that low of a level. Our levels are 1.0 to 4 parts per million. And we're dealing at those levels. Of course, you can measure at low levels now, so we're picking up things. The DDT, I know, is measured in billions. So they formulate a map, and it shows this, and what you have there are some channels. And just for reference, if you're not familiar with our harbor, we have the federal channel that runs down the middle, and that's an actually defined channel where the ships go. It's a deeper channel than the rest of the harbor. That is supposed to be 20 feet deep. The sides are actually 10 feet, and they're really not navigable, although we navigate in, but if it's a big ship comes in, it'll stay in that federal channel. And then the one that goes up towards the Rhine Channel there, is it's supposed to be 15 feet deep, which is about anywhere from 10 to minus 13. It varies in there. And the anchorage in the middle, the big blue area, is supposed to be 15 feet. And these are negative numbers, by the way. So the colors represent a couple things, too. The blue tested that that material can be taken straight out to the open ocean. That's a good thing, because that's the least expensive for us. The green material has constituents in it that the federal government will not let us take out to the open ocean. It needs to be disposed of in a different way. When I talk about disposals in the open ocean, I mentioned the near shore. We take it out of the harbor. That green kind of hashed area is our near shore zone. It's basically up against the beaches. And if you've ever seen us dredge before, or when we're moving material down from other areas, when we did Marina Park, for instance, that was able to be put in the near shore. We'd bring the barges in as close as we can to the surf zone, and we drop the material there, and then the wave action would move the material up towards the beach. That's what that represents. The little corner slide there is what they call LA3. This is an EPA certified location where they have a couple of these along the coast that you're allowed to drop certain materials in out in the open ocean, but it's 6 miles out there, so you can imagine a tug going out and back takes some time to do that. So that's the disposal of most of the material, about 1 million yards of the 1.2 million. Big question, what do we do about that 100,000? Well, that's a good question. We can't take it out to the open ocean, so we started developing some options here. And the first option there, regulatory permit relief. That's the first thing we talked about. And I sat through many meetings in Washington and San Francisco with the EPA and the Corps of Engineers and others saying, why can't we move this material? I understand your limit is 1.0 parts per million. That is very low. And they have all kinds of reasons. They just know that they treat the ocean and the bay as two different things. This is the bureaucracy and the regulatory things that sometimes get in the way and we have to deal with. They're fine with this material in the bay, and they told us that. There's no problems with the material. It can just stay in place. It's not causing any problems. If it was, both the regional board and the EPA would have already given us an order to take care of this material. So it's sitting on the bottom of the bay. They're fine with that. If I want to move it out to the open ocean, different set of rules apply. It doesn't get to go there just like that. It has to meet certain requirements because they're worried about other things. There's a lot of things out in the dump sites that they have, and bioaccumulation's one of them. You know, little things eating bigger things, and that, like mercury is one of them that bioaccumulates up the food chain. So they're worried about it getting out in the ocean, even though they don't have a problem with it being in the bay. So we worked really hard on that. In fact, we went all the way up to Washington, sat through several meetings with our council members and ourselves with the EPA, their top brass there, and we basically, through avocation too, working with our legislators, pounded on them to move that line. And that was one thing we were able to do. So we got some regulatory relief I'll talk about. Some of the other options are ocean project reuse. If you have another area, maybe you can reuse it. And we did do this in 2012 when we did the Rhine Channel, if you're around. We were able to take some of that material, which was really high levels of contaminants, and we took it over the Port of Long Beach and we put it inside one of the berths. But those options just aren't around and they're not frequent, and right now there's nothing on the foreseeable future. So there's that. There's Upland Disposal, and you could leave it in place. That was one of the options we looked at and we talked about. Or we can do what we call in-harbor placement. So I talked a little bit about regulatory relief. This map here I just showed you a minute ago. Watch the blue and the green on this. This is the mercury symbol at the top, and this is what the federal standard says. Nothing higher than 1 part per million can go in the ocean. So, okay, if that's the case, all the green has to stay or do something else with it. The blue can be put out in the ocean either on the beach or in LA3. We were able to get that bar moved from 1.0 to 1.5, and that's a big, big deal, and it really hasn't happened. And of course, there's a lot of concern still with that too. But look at how the green reduced, the amount of material that we have to address separately. So you've got it here, and then we were able to get it here. That was a significant move by the federal government. I don't think we can get any further than that. We have tried and tried, but they worry about precedents. They worry about, there are some in the federal government that said, hey, all this material is fine. You can move it out there. We don't have a problem. But the EPA's job is to protect the ocean. They would be afraid, I think, if they move that more. There are lots of cities that have bigger problems than we do. Oakland, some of the big industrial areas, they would love to take all their stuff out. So they're holding the line like Newport, no way. We give you more, we're going to have a landslide and we're going to have all kinds of problems. So that was a good thing. We got a lot of material taken off that way, I think. We're still asking, but they're still saying no. So we talked about an ocean project reuse. This was the Port of Long Beach I talked about. Back in 2012, Chris was able to maneuver a deal where they put it right there. We got rid of some material. There is nothing like that on the horizon. We don't have an option for this right now. And waiting around isn't really a foreseeable way to go either. It could be 10, 15 years if it's even viable or even economical. We wouldn't take that material and haul it all the way up to San Francisco. So the other one is Upland Disposal. We looked at this. So this is the Navy down in Coronado Bay down in San Diego, and this is just an example of what they do. They put it up, they go out in the bay and they pick it up and they stick it on a scow, and they take the scow over to a dock, and then from there they dump it and they take it from a crane, they dump it in a truck, and that material is actually being hauled off to Yuma. And I talked to the Yuma landfill, and it's quite a chore and it's quite expensive. You can imagine you're triple handling this material, picking it up here, picking it up there, and putting it in Yuma and then picking it up. That adds a lot of cost to it. It's also very wet. It needs to be dried out. So this option is we could probably do something like this, but in reality, very expensive, very disruptive. The other side of this option is how do you get it out of the harbor? Well, we have a wharf. We could bring it over to Rhine Wharf. We could put a scow in there just for we really explored this. And how do we do this? We could set up a crane or something there, and we could put in trucks there. But those poor people on the Lido Peninsula over there, you can imagine, you're going to talk about at least 8,400 trucks. That's a lot of trucks that are going to go out of here, and I'm not sure where they're going. I think Yuma is one of the places. The expense of that, you can imagine, it has to be dewatered too. I'm not sure how we would do that. Or we'd have to take less material in the truck with the water, take it out to where we're going and dewater it there. So this option isn't really viable from a cost standpoint and an impact standpoint. I don't know, we'd have an environmental impact with all those trucks and diesel too, so that would be a concern. So we kept looking at options. Someone said leave it in place, and we said, yeah, we're looking at that, and I can get that. But what I did on this slide, just for those who know the harbor, I circled those areas. If we leave it in place, those are the high spots, these big humps of material that are down there. If we just leave that in place, those stars are just things that I know, that you probably know of different things. There's some big shipyards back there. Their viability is getting those large ships back to them for business. If they can't get their ships back there, that's a problem. There's back by Newport Harbor, if we don't dredge that on the Newport Island side, those ships are starting to have grounding problems as they're trying to get through there. You could have that problem come up. You've got berthing issues where people need to get to the Rhine Wharf or some of the larger docks by Lido. By leaving it in place, we take those out of play. So, we have problems. I know there's one ship, a large ship that comes in, the Invictus, is that what it is? It comes in at high tide because it's a pretty deep draft, and even that, it's pluming up some material. So I don't know what other ships aren't coming to our port. They drop a lot of money on that, but because we have some high spots, maybe we're losing some business there. So I don't know about leaving it in place. I don't think that's a viable option for our economic health of our harbor. So then we talked about in-place placement. Now this is a little harder to understand for some folks, but let me look at it this way. Underneath our harbor, when it was built, it was a Santa Ana River comes there. We have a lot of sand under our harbor. So what if we take and mine that sand out of the bottom, dig a big hole, take that sand, go put it on the beach where we need sand, and now we have a hole. What if we scrape the bottom of the harbor with the stuff that we can't move out and put it in the hole and then just put material on top? That's kind of what we're talking about. Digging a hole, taking the material up and put it in there. So this is what they call in-harbor or confined aquatic disposal. You'll hear that. You can obviously make sense of it. It's in a hole, it's confined, it's in the water, it's aquatic, and we're disposing of it in the hole. That's what the official name where they use it in the EPA. And this has been done in many harbors. So we're looking at this. And this is an alternative that we're leaning on because it's probably the most viable for us. So we looked at various options in there to where would be the best place to put it. Right now we're looking at this place right in the middle of the harbor. That's at the end of Lido Isle, next to Harbor Island right in the middle. That's an area that we have worked in before, and we have to do removals in there anyway, so we're looking at maybe the aquatic disposal should go here. What does that mean? I mentioned this. This is kind of a graphic. We're going to bring in the barge and scow. We're going to dig this hole down so that we have an area. That material we dig out is going to go out and be placed on the ocean side. And then we're going to take material in the harbor already on the bottom, and we're going to move it in and put it in this hole. And then we'll put some kind of cap on it. It could be sand or something it'll just stay there for the rest of its life. So to get a scale of this, we've had several questions about, well, that's a very busy location. There's a lot of things that go through that, and we understand that. So the last time we were working in this area, and that's why you see this picture, these are slides from 2012, we took all the anchorage out of there, we took all the mooring boats, and you have a big open area. So we are working with some folks, the mariners were concerned about sailboat races and other things going through there. But you can imagine when all those boats are out, it's a lot less cluttered than it is when there's an anchorage and other things in there. And the actual equipment, this is interesting because we were working, and Chris pointed out to me, there's the scow at the very top. That's the actual scow they use. You can see the size. And down below at the very bottom, just in the picture, is the barge. So those are actually scaled events on how that equipment would sit in there. This picture here is how the scow would dump, just so you could see, because after we dig this hole, and the hole digging would probably take 2 to 3 months. So this person would be working out there. During our permit requirements, working with the Corps, we're talking about how can we do this for the least impact? Well, why don't we work 5 days a week during the day? On the weekend, maybe we don't work. The barge, everything's moved aside. The sailboats can everything go through when it's busy, and then we go back. Why don't we do this in the winter when it's not too busy? We're looking for reducing impacts of that. But then when they're dredging the rest of the harbor and they come across some of this material that we can't take out in the open ocean, they'll put it in a little scow, and that scow will literally just pull up, drop, and then move over and go get filled up again. So it might be 10, 15 minutes in that area at a time, and the rest of the time it's basically open. That's kind of how the CAD works. I put this picture in too because I did have some mariners give me questions. Hey, this is a really busy area. We have all this stuff. Well, you're going through that now. You've got an anchorage there. You've got the main channels with mooring boats in it. You look at that, and then you look at what it would be like this. I think it's a lot easier to maneuver, especially if the weekend there's nothing there. So that's just something we need to work with because they're another constituent that we have to work with. And these projects are difficult. And I'll put another thing out because I get asked this question a lot. I work in all your backyards. I work in your front yards. I'm on your roads. I'm on your sewers. Everybody needs maintenance. Everything needs maintenance. I'm going to grind one of your streets one of these days. I'm going to overlay your streets. I'm going to slur your streets. I'm sorry, your birthday party's that day, but the slurry's drying. We give you notice. We try to work with you. But things need work. Your roof wears out. Your kitchen wears out. Our harbor needs some dredging. And so we're going to have some impacts. Because I've had some people worry about, well, I'm going to be impacted. My sailboat race is going to be that day. We will do our best to accommodate. We might have to make some moves. But that's the difficult thing in my business, working in construction. Couple things. Chris gave me some good shots. This is when we were dredging in 2012. You can see that, you kind of see Collins Island in the back harbor. That's a big area out there, and there's the barge in the middle. So yeah, we're going to see that for a while. You're going to see that moving around. It's going to be in this spot for 2, maybe 3 months, and then it's going to be moving all around the harbor, collecting material as we dredge the harbor out. The good news is that we found with the recent stuff, we've been doing a lot of water quality improvements too. As Orange County's developed on San Diego Creek, we're doing a lot more removing of sediment materials ahead of time. We don't think this harbor is going to need dredging at least for another 100 years. That's how good it's been upstream. We're not getting the material in anymore. We have 2 big basins too, if you're not aware. We dug them when we did the upper bays right at the top of San Diego Creek. When you look out the Jamboree Bridge, you'll see that big pond out there. Just imagine there's a huge hole right underneath there. There's another one on the next bay down. We dug those out, kind of like we dig here, and they just collect sediment. We're collecting it up there so it doesn't make it down to the lower bay. That's going to help us from not having to dredge in the future. So one other thing we want to do, we really care about our residents, as you know. We're trying to help them out. And this was our harbor commissioner's thoughts and some of our council members. What do we do about all these people who have dock problems? If you have a dock in here, your boat gets grounded, you get material in it, you have a couple options. You go hire somebody to remove that material. If you're lucky, the material is sandy. And guess what? They get to pump it up on the beach, or they get to take it out really a short distance out and put it on an ocean beach. And that's relatively inexpensive. If you're less lucky, you have silts under your boat. Guess what? If it's clean enough, it goes out to LA3, right? LA3, 6 miles out, you only have 50 yards. He has to have a 200-yard scow or something. It's very expensive. I've heard people spending $50,000 to try to clean out underneath their boat. That's hard. If you're less lucky and you have some of that material that has traces of mercury or PCBs or something in it, and it tests that way, the EPA and the Corps will not give us a permit to take it out of the harbor. What do? Most of those people aren't doing anything. That material's still there. We still get a call. How can I take care of this? So when we looked at this, we said, if we're going to put this in harbor disposal area in, why don't we add a little more capacity in it? So we thought about 50,000 yards, and that's what this slide's talking about. Why don't we add a little more so those folks can dredge at a very economical cost, get it done now? Now, they're going to have to act. If we are able to pull this off, we'll be notifying everybody in the harbor saying, look, get your permits, get ready, and when we have this available, get it up and get it in there. So that's one thing we're going to do. The proposed plan there, again, is to, we're not, and there's an important point here. I'd heard some folks talk about this. Well, what about other people bringing material in here? In our permit, we'll make sure with the Corps, it's only for Newport Beach and Newport Beach marinas. We're not going to have Oceanside or Dana Point, anybody else bringing material, and they won't be permitted. It's just for our use, basically. And that's kind of the deal we cut with the EPA. The EPA said if we're going to lower our limit from 1 to 1.5, you got to take care of everything in your harbor. This isn't a come back later. This is a one-time deal. That was one of the main characteristics of the deal that we talked about with them in Washington. So we have a little time, though. So we said, what about the residents? Why don't we go ahead and while we're doing our project, if the residents are working with their dredgers, and we have several in the harbor, we'll allow them to come and get their material. And it doesn't have to be tainted material. It could be the clean silt stuff. And instead of taking it 6 miles off the coast, just take it over here and it costs you hardly anything. We'll allow that. And then we'll put the anchorage back at the end of the job. And then probably, we're thinking right now, we talked about maybe keeping this disposal area open for 10 years. And when I say open, it's only open intermittently when we take the anchorage off, let people dispose and come back and it turns into an anchorage. But we're thinking maybe we could shorten that because some concerns are some people think that's a long time, 10 years. And maybe it is. Maybe it's 5 years because if we can't get our act together, we let everybody know. They can plan for it. Maybe it's a 5-year. Well, right now we're talking even 2 years. Maybe we come back in 2 years, we reopen it, take the anchorage out, give people 4 to 6 months, get your private dredgers, you've got your permits now, bring your material and put it in there. And then we close it down after that. And once we're done, we're done. There's a cap on it. And there'll be no more. And then whoever missed that boat is going back to the old process of taking that to LA3. So that's the overview. I know this is a very big subject. I want to give you a quick overview of that. I'm going to turn it back to questions and answers. Now I'll give it to Chris and I to maybe take some questions and answers if you have them. So I think Ed said we have a couple microphones. I'm happy to share this one. And Hugh's going to help over there.
Going to do me, Hugh? Thank you. You've been silent this evening on everything west of the Newport Bridge going over into whether it's Newport Island, Balboa Coves, over all the way over to the Santa Ana River. And so could you make any comments about that, how this enters into the report that you're giving?
And I apologize if I'm silent. Let me go back to a slide so people can see what we're talking about there. Over on Newport Island, that is not included in this project. I don't know if I have a big enough slide, but maybe up there. It's not a federal channel, so it's not included in this. That's one area that's not. It does need dredging. We get a lot of requests out of them. And actually this year, we just had our CIP presentation at council last night. We asked for money to put in a bathymetry survey, basically an underwater survey, to see what's there. And our next step is how do we dredge that material? It's going to be challenging, just knowing it. I'm not sure how to do it yet, but we're looking to start figuring that out. Other questions?
Yes, I live on Bay Island, facing west. It occurs to me that while this work is underway, the westerlies will send odor our way and perhaps contaminants. What can you tell us about that potential problem?
So probably a good question on that. I don't know about odors. I don't know what's down there. We do know that there's a lot of sand material down there. I wouldn't expect a lot of odors, but historically with the Santa Ana River, you might have some old vegetation there. I would think it'd be very minimal. Contaminants I'm not worried about because this is not blowable. It's in the sediment. Most of it's sand. And when I talk about contaminants, because I know this is always a concern, I really strive to talk about those levels that we're talking about, parts per billion. And the level that the EPA says is safe in the ocean for us to dispose is 1.0. Ours is 1 to 4 parts per million. I mean, that's very low. It's on this side of the scale, not that side of the scale. And we're playing it in, it's all in, it's on our sand now, and it doesn't seem to be a concern. They told us they're not concerned with it. So I don't see a concern of any kind of contaminants blowing. It's if it even dried up and was getting out. It's wet material going into a scow and being moved out. It's not a bunch of dry material that's blowable, if that helps. That's my best estimate at this point. Chris, do you have anything on it?
I was just going to say in 2012, we spent a considerable amount of time in front of Newport Harbor Yacht Club and the Anchorage area dredging. It was a couple months, if I remember correctly. So this would be about the same amount of time, 2 to 3 months constructing the CAD, and then more time in front of the Newport Harbor Yacht Club mooring field.
Do you remember any questions you got back then on odors or anything?
No, I actually do not recall fielding those types of issues or questions.
So, question, if you like, or
Dave, great presentation. Congratulations on going from 1.0 to 1.5. That was a big win there. How much money, we've got 4.6 million set aside. How much do we still need for the project from the federal government? And it sounds like it's a win-win all the way across the board. Congratulations. Looks like the only question I had was what you did with the sand that was in the hole. And I think Chris can use that sand, right? For sure. So, I mean, it sounds like win-win across the board. If we can just get the money to fund it, we should be good.
So two things. Thanks, Dennis. And I'll strive again. The sand coming out of the hole would go to the beach. That's where we need it instead of trying. We could mine it. We actually, if you don't know, we actually participate in mining sand up in Seal Beach that's put on the beach and works its way down to our ocean beaches. So we're always trying to replenish our beaches. You see us in West Newport. The Santa Ana River puts a bunch. We're always pulling it down. The growing. So we're trying to get more sand on our beaches to make sure we have protection. Your other question, how much it costs? The council has $4.6 million in there. The project itself, when we pencil it out, is about a $23 million project. We think we can cut some corners and maybe tighten those numbers down, and that might come down a little bit. The federal government's been really tricky to work with. We think maybe 15 is where they're at right now. They've already given us 2. We're on the menu. That's the big thing when you learn to Washington. You can imagine all these legislators and all the stuff they're dealing with. And why it's important for our councilists to go there is, as the staff will say, you need to get on the menu. You're not even in their view if you're not talking to them. So we went there, and now we're on the menu, and they gave us $2 million, which is the first part, and now we're actively talking about it. And I mean, there's a lot of, I could talk to some of the council members, but there's a lot of discussion in Washington about funding our project. I'm real hopeful for next year. You also learn that you have to wait in line because there's more need than federal money, and there's a few people that have been waiting longer than us. I know we were close this year. I heard Petaluma actually got funded. They've been waiting for like 5 or 6 years, and they have problems too. So we might just be the next one to get that money. We'll be working on it still, but the good question.
I live in Irvine Terrace, and I know that the drainage from all of Irvine Terrace and even part of Coast Highway goes down into that North Balboa Bay channel, Balboa Island channel. And it looks like you haven't done any measurements or anything there because obviously it's not part of the federal throughway.
Well, actually, those channels are supposed to be -10, and they don't need dredging right now. We just dredged the Grand Canal, if you saw that, some of that. But you're heard, if you don't know where it's coming out, look at the green spot where the country club is. The big drain that comes out of there goes into the upper channel just above Balboa Island, and that's where your channel comes out. The good news is, too, that we've done a lot of work on your things. We've been doing on our water quality side. We put what we called CDS structures in that pick up trash down to a cigarette butt, and also all the silts and fines that come through. We're collecting it now, so it's not ending up in the bay. We do have to dredge our own marina. The city owns that big yacht marina, the white dots up there. That's an area we have to dredge, too. So hopefully we're in good shape up there. Ma'am?
What is the exact cost between taking it to, let's say, Yuma or Paducah, where they're burying all of the nuclear waste, versus this? What's the exact difference in the cost?
I don't have an exact number, but I will tell you, typical dredging, $12 to $15 a yard.
Yes, so if you were to dredge, as we're proposing here, we're estimating using a $15 a cubic yard. So rough math, you multiply that times 1 million cubic yards. But trucking is more complex because of the slides that were showed earlier about drying the material, treating the material on land, trucking it. A good number to use might be $200 a cubic yard. So when you do 200 times $200 a cubic yard times, let's say 100,000 cubic yards, that's a very big number. Not to mention the amount of truck trips that would be needed at, let's say, 15 yards a truck, going back and forth, and the wear and tear and the environmental impact and the street wear and tear and so on and so forth.
So what about drying it here before it's shipped?
Good question. It's a space confined. That's a big problem. It's cheaper if we could dry it here and not dry it there. But when I talked to the gentleman on the San Diego job, I actually called to the CR&R Yuma landfill. They actually take it out wet there. They dry it there because it's going to come out wet. They still got to dry it, and they have spreading grounds out there. $150 to $200 is not out of the question per yard. I've done old jobs where I'm doing landside stuff that used to be about $100 a yard to deal with oil contaminated stuff and just taking it dry, putting it in a truck and hauling it off. It's very expensive. So the economics start flipping over. Along, if you remember that slide, think of all the loading and all the things that have to happen there. It'd be tough to do, and I don't know, environmentally we'd have some challenges too. So that's one of the big reasons why that one's not high on the list. Other questions? Way in the back, I'm sorry. Ed, there's a lady with her hand.
I'd like to know what you're going to do during this project about all the green slime that is around the beaches.
Well, that's a good question too. That's not related to dredging, but I know we have some algae buildups. We do occasionally go out and have our contractor rake it up. I see it over by 19th Street. We rake up Balboa Island once in a while. The dredging is not going to affect the green slime. We're talking about dredging material on the bottom. That green slime tends to grow in the tide line. But we do have restrictions on that too, because remember, the ocean's a living body. It's not a swimming pool. So we have folks that watch us and say, don't pick up all that stuff. That's habitat, basically. So, but we do try to keep up with the green material and get the moss that gets too much.
So who do I call to have it taken away from the front of my house, my bay?
I'm sure we can talk to you about that. I don't know if it's a public beach. I think, is that? Yeah.
The city owns all the beaches, doesn't it, even though it's my dock right there.
Tell you what, I'd be happy to talk. I don't know enough about your beach, but a lot of private property owners take care of their own frontage. And I think the tip of Lido, I think is where you live, might be private, at least under the lease agreements. But we can talk on the side.
So what does that mean?
Means that you'd be responsible if it's your beach. To just flat out, like Balboa Island is all public beaches with a public boardwalk around, so the city will clean those beaches. We don't typically clean in front of private property. But I'm happy to talk to you more about that.
Hi, Dave. Can you, two questions. One question, who would be removing the material that's green? Is that the city that would be doing that or paying for that, or would that be the local residents and the local businesses?
This job is technically and officially a Corps of Engineers federal project. So the Corps' contractor would be taking care of both material that's blue and green. Economies of scale, we'd have the same contract.
So as I understand it, this CAD in the center is quite oversized, 3 to 6 times I've seen, but say three times. What is have you canvassed the residents or community to find out how many people would actually use this or commit to use this if we size it that size?
Well, the incremental size that you're referring to is the extra capacity for 50,000 cubic yards. That number could be reduced, but we do know from the city has what's called a regional general permit, which is not related to this, but we have sampled all the shoreline of the entire harbor. And so we know that there are certain pockets of our harbor that are not able to go to LA3. And if those folks want to dredge today, they might have problems.
No, I understand that. I just wondered how many people have been contacted or talked about it that would be actually interested in this.
We've had somewhere in not a lot, but maybe in the 5-6 range of residents who have come to us recently. 5 or 6 residents. Yeah. Okay. So, and there's also that 50,000 cubic yards would also be used for dredging the city's owned Balboa Yacht Basin, as an example.
Dave, could you also talk about the two-site option, which you didn't talk about, this two-site option versus the east?
Real quick on your first question too. Part of our outreach is letting people know we're trying to make this available. So we don't know how many people will use it. We're hoping a lot. Over the years, I know Chris gets a lot of questions. I got more when I started getting into his world about how do I dredge underneath my dock. So there is a need out there, whether people take it up or not. As I understand, it's been kind of economically challenging for folks to do that in the future or the past because it's so expensive. This will be an option, so maybe that's a good idea. If we get all our permits and everything's ready to go, maybe we canvass and say before we actually dig, how many people are going to use this? If we only need 30,000 yards, maybe we shrink it down. We're happy to save money. That's a great idea. If no one's going to use it and you want to go the old route, then have at it. But if you want to use it, it's going to be made available. I'm sorry, your second question?
I'd like you to address the two-site option that we talked about putting material adjacent to the site that's located now versus trucking it to the middle.
Yes, this one here. So we did look at this. Where do you try to put an in-harbor placement area? There's been some talk about, well, what if you put it where it's kind of generated? Remember the slide, a lot of it's back in the back of the harbor there. We looked at these various options, and you could take any two of these. Pick your poison, which is more, but if you look from a constructability standpoint, if you pick one, let's say that we take the one over by the mooring field next to Marina Park. It's still in front of folks' houses on both sides. We have to move a whole mooring field to get to it. I don't know what's under that because we didn't test that spot, but regardless, it could be done. It can't handle as much as the other one. It's not a big enough size, so I'd need two. So then let's say I take the one on the far side. Let's say that rectangle on the top. Okay, there's some material there too, but rectangles aren't as efficient as squares, as you know. I've got two sites that the contractor's managing. It may be more costly. I know when we did the numbers, it looked to be more costly. And then from a management point, remember you've got a barge that's filling up stuff and it's moving it. If I'm moving it around Lido Island, I can't go underneath the bridge. I'm going back and forth. You've just got more time in the water with this barge and this operation going on. Whereas I'm digging in one spot and I go to a central location and I fill up, or if I have one load of stuff I find, I can go there. If not, it just keeps going, it goes out. The math worked better with one central spot. And again, from an imposition standpoint, because some folks say, hey, that's going to be in front of my house for a couple months, I get it. But there's probably less people there. If you look along that long rectangle one, there's a lot of people there too. Who's going to get it? I don't know. So we looked at an economic, a functional, and from a contractable standpoint. Probably makes sense to be more in the center there. It's also an anchorage that we can just take out. We've taken it out several times versus a mooring field. Taking a mooring field apart is very expensive. Chris has done that a couple times. Moving boats, moving all their gear, all their rigging, putting it somewhere, moving it back, and then setting them. So, did you have any comments on that?
I was just going to add that in the turning basin location, there is a veneer of material that can't go to LA3. So now you have a question of if you were to go in the very top left-hand portion of the screen, what to do with that top 1 or 2 feet of material. You'd have to figure out and dig a mini hole to accommodate that, dig the rest of that hole, fill it up, then take the first part and stick it back. You'd have to do a shell game, in other words. So that top area does make it more complicated. I'm referring to the area called the turning basin, which is the upper left-hand corner, the square box.
Up by Leo. I'll go back a slide because you can see that we have material up in all these areas. That's the green areas are the ones we're looking at there. How about other questions?
That's me. Hi. So thank you, Chris and Dave. This is my, 5th, 6th presentation. And while I've had a lot of questions answered in some of those presentations, I can still not get my head around the fact that you want to take the unsuitable material and move it all into one area in the bay. I don't call that removing unsuitable material out of our bay. I call it relocating it in our bay. So regardless of whether it's in a CAD or not, it's still there. So what is the point of moving it all into a clean area? Now, I know you guys changed after a couple of presentations and said it's not completely clean there. But it is dredgeable and it is suitable to go out according to the government, right? Yes. So when you refer to slurring someone's street, and that's an inconvenience, I don't think anybody in this room has a problem with dredging in the bay. Any of us who live here understand that dredging is a good thing. It can be a good thing. But I do think that moving unsuitable material into a CAD is really the problem that Lido Island has and has expressed, that Surfrider Foundation has expressed, that many different organizations in our bay have expressed to you. So I don't see this as an answer. I just see it as a shuffle. And I'm not okay with a CAD in any part of the bay, whether it's in front of my house, whether it's in front of the lighthouse. You know, I think that there should be what we had discussed at the very first meeting of a phase 3 plan to get that out. Now you speak of that this has to be an all or nothing, but when I asked you, where is that in writing? I've read through all those documents, and I don't see anywhere in writing where one is dependent on the other.
I'll be happy to try to answer that. Those are discussions we've had with the EPA, and those will be part of our permits. We haven't got our permits. There's a lot of discussion figuring out how we do this. I understand that Tippolito is closer to this. When I look at this picture here, I've heard pictures like, put it somewhere else. Go somewhere else with this material. We would love to do that. Help us find that. I'm sorry, I can't find that slide. But where else would you go in the harbor? You know, that is one big area there. But any one of those squares will have challenges. There are people that live in front of all those squares. There are people who have to watch that dredge rig for 2 months, wherever. It'll take more time, we know, to dig multiple holes. And again, I'm not wanting to debate this, Shauna, with you right now because it's a very deep topic and I understand your concerns. But when you look at the engineers, we've had our consultants look at this from contractor side. That's probably a little more economical, it's more faster, and I don't know if it serves the purpose of dig 2. It's probably more disruptive, and I understand we probably differ in opinion on that. So at this point, that's kind of what we're looking at. We can keep looking to make sure if someone has a better idea where we can put this material, leaving it in place we don't believe is an option. I pointed that out to you. When are we going to come back? The federal government, it has taken literally us to drag them into this project for 5 years. If we don't do it as part of this project, I mean, I won't be here, but I doubt they're going to come back and do it. It'll be on the city's dime somewhere if we do it. And we'll still have the same problem. The material can't go out in the open ocean. What are you going to do with it? So,
I just want to make it really clear that when we speak against this CAD, we are not speaking against dredging.
and I'm clear with that. I understand that.
And people imply that. And I also want to make it clear that I don't have a problem with those big dredge machines. I think they're cool to watch. I watched them in 2012. We waved at them as they went by with our grandkids. It's a very unique thing to see. However, my problem is I don't want to just move unsuitable material from one part of the bay to a different part of the bay.
And again, I think we'll just have to talk more about that in detail. There's a gentleman back here too that's been waiting. Blue shirt.
Yeah, hi, Gary Hill. I've been involved in a lot of the dredging in the harbor. And I went to your first meeting. I did not like the idea of the hole being open for 10 years, and I really appreciate you closing it, bringing it down to a 2-year deal. I agree with you. I don't see your option. I think a CAD would work fine. I don't have a problem if you put a top on it, but I think now that you've closed it down to 2 years, I'm very much on board with it. Thank you.
I have a question. Dave, one question. Has anyone talked to the Navy about their expansion at Los Alamitos? They might have some use for the material there.
I know our consultants are in touch with them, and they talk to the Corps a lot. They should know all the permitting. But Chris, do you have any? Not off the head. We can double check that. We have been asking the Corps any jobs coming up and any big things they know. They got to get Corps permits so they would know it. So we don't know of anything in Los Alamitos right now. And that would be something too. If something came up and we could find something like we did in Long Beach, that's a great option. We could talk to council about that. We'd love to do something like that if it was viable and it's available. Gentleman in the back, I believe.
Yeah, Bob Yates, fleet captain for Harbor 20s. We have about 150 boats sailing in the bay, and we're very concerned about the placement of the CAD site there. As I look at that chart, though, I look at the square there representing your present concept, about 300,000 cubic yards of space to take maybe 100,000 cubic yards of material. But then you put the 3 sites up there on the left side, on the west side, and they're about the same size, 300,000 yards each. That's 900,000 yards of capacity if I were to take and scale your drawing. If you were to make smaller sites at the point of the contamination, they would be 1/3 the size, or maybe 1/6 the size of what you show there on your diagram, and that would, from the numbers I hear, be enough to take the 100,000 yards of contaminated soil that you've got.
And thank you. We have looked at that. Recognize every hole you dig, there's a lot of wasted space because there's side slopes you have to dig out to make the hole the depth. There's top material you remove. So there's an economic scale when you do one versus many. that's just one of the calculations. There's also an economic of time as they're working back and forth. So we thank you for your comment on that, though.
Hi, Dave. Dave, thanks you and Chris for trying to talk to everybody about this. But I thought I heard earlier today that we had somebody from the Harbor Commission here. And I recall looking at the report originally that the Harbor Commission had recommended putting the CAD sites adjacent to where the material was. And I wondered how that changed, or if that changed. Can they address that, or can you address what the conversation's been with the Harbor Commission?
Just as the project has progressed, I've been talking to the Harbor Commission for many years on this, and each meeting that I have with the Harbor Commission, I get more specific as I learn more details as time goes on. Initially, the Harbor Commission was thinking in that direction, but after time goes by and we learn more and more about the project and the constraints, they have supported that location conceptually. And the Harbor Commission did leave. There were 3 or 4 members here. Their meeting starts right now, right across the way. For the same reason that we've been discussing the constructability and learning more and how we've described the project this evening. Yes.
Yeah, question for you, Balboa Peninsula resident. I haven't heard anything tonight at all about the environmental impact this project might have, specifically towards the marine environment and water quality in our bay. So if you guys could speak a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a very important point. The process that we're going through right now is that we are currently in the environmental impact report stage, meaning that we are drafting the draft EIR, which should be done, I'm hoping, by about the end of April. And then that will be out, and that will consider all the factors that you brought up and more. And it'll be available for public comment and review. And then we'll absorb that, incorporate comments, and eventually publish a final EIR later on in the summertime.
Just follow up. I think I mentioned, maybe I failed to mention, one of the big objectives too is to improve the tidal flushing. If we can dredge and get rid of material, we get more tidal flushing, and that helps our water quality in the bay. We do have some water quality concerns in the very back of the bay, Newport Island and back when you get back Lido. Mainly has to do with copper boat paints and things like that because there's not enough flushing. But we are seeing our water in the bay being cleaner than it has been a long time. We think this project will increase the flushing ability, even bring some of the eelgrass to be able to grow further back.
So just one follow-up. So to your point, Chris, timeline. So draft EIR April, and where do you guys go from there?
Well, it's a little loose when we'll have the final draft, but right now I'm shooting for late April. And then it's out for public comment per the guidelines for CEQA. And then it will come back to us, and then we'll evaluate all those comments, incorporate them into a final document in the summertime, and perhaps have it in front of the city or Harbor Commission and City Council. I'll just loosely say late summer or so.
Okay, this will be the last question.
I'd like to know if I can put that slimy green stuff in that CAD.
I don't think it'll sink. Normally it is floating or near the surface, but. In the winter it sits on the water, and in the summer it floats to the top. Okay. That's something we can consider. That's a good thought to think about. I'm not sure how we would logistically do that, but I'll put that in the hopper.
All right, well, let's give Dave and Chris a hand here. Thank you guys for coming out. You know, we're really lucky to have hardworking city employees like this that really do a diligent job, so we should be very thankful for that. Also, another shout out to the bungalow for providing all the food for us. Don't forget the comment cards if you have some thoughts on that. And our next program is going to be on April the 8th. We have a special speaker, I think, lined up, not quite confirmed, but keep an eye out for our announcement. I think it's going to be a good program. So we'll see you back here next month.